Hey guys, this makeup lecture from yesterday in history, something went wrong. It was a pretty good lecture. I had five and live stream, so really this is probably for about, I don't know, 8 or 10 students. So I'm doing this on Wednesday. The last thing we talked about in the previous lecture was the Doolittle rate. Okay, and this is where President Roosevelt, really kind of demanded of the military to figure out some way to hit back at the Japanese. Okay, and the real problem with that is the situation with putting our Navy at risk, um, putting our aircraft carriers at risk. Okay, so if I bring up this map of the Pacific here, over here. Okay, so the goal here, if you try and get your aircraft carriers in close enough to launch like fighter bombers, you know, regular aircraft carrier planes like the Corsair, the Dauntless, these planes that fly off of carriers, um, you're going to put your ships at risk because the Japanese are patrolling all throughout here, watching for our Navy. So there's actually a submarine commander that came up with this idea to put land-based B-25 bombers on an aircraft carrier so that they could launch from closer to 600 miles out from Japan, and then they could leave because you can't land one of these bombers on an aircraft carrier. Okay, so if they could get within 600 miles, they could launch their planes, they could hit Japan, okay, bomb it, and then try and get to China that is not occupied by the Japanese. Okay, and so to give you an idea here, these crews, these flight crews, they all volunteered. They were told this is a secret mission. There's a very good chance you will not survive. So it's almost a suicide mission. And they are not told what this mission is, okay, until they are on the aircraft carrier, okay? So this slide here shows you, this is an artist's rendition of the aircraft carrier USS Hornet, and these are the B-25s. Now, as you can tell, guys, you can only fit 16 of these on there, and yet they had to put them on there with a crane. Now, how are you going to take off on one of these bombers on an aircraft carrier? That was something these guys had to train for. Okay, so they trained for short takeoff situations on land, and they really had to lighten the planes, like take anything that was unnecessary in the plane out. Okay, and so what's going to happen, guys, is you're going to have to pack these planes back in this corner to create a runway long enough for the planes to take off. Okay, and of course the guy in charge, this is known as the Doolittle raid, is Jimmy Doolittle here. Okay, this is something I didn't mention the other day, is he's holding right here some Japanese friendship medals that the Japanese gave us when they were pretending to talk peace. And guys, we're going to give them back. We're going to give those medals back. We're going to attach them to one of the bombs and give them back to Japan. Okay, so now what ends up happening, guys, is I go back to this map. They were hoping to get, excuse me, I think I said this, 400 miles in. Okay, to bring normal planes close enough, you would have to get about 200 miles. So they were hoping to get within about 400 miles. Well, they got spotted out here about 600 miles by a Japanese picket boat. And the Japanese boat radioed back to the Japanese headquarters, telling them that they had spotted an American carrier. We sunk that picket boat too late. So they had to make a decision to go or not from further out, from 600 miles out. And they made the decision to go. Okay, and the first pilot of the first crew going off the ship is going to be Doolittle. Okay, so he'll have the shortest takeoff. Will be Jimmy Doolittle here. Okay, and this, you can see this picture up here. Just this plane is limping off. So you get the aircraft carrier full speed into the wind to create more lift under the wings, and then gun it, and hopefully you get airborne. All 6 of them got airborne, okay? Now, some of these planes are going to make it to unoccupied China, okay? Others will not. This is a cool picture of some Americans, flight crew here, with some Japanese folks, not Japanese, sorry, Chinese folks that helped rescue. They're crash landing these planes into open fields, rice paddies, stuff like that. And so these guys were rescued by these Chinese folks. These are some B-25s. So you can see this is a pretty big plane. It's a bomber, okay? So this is really a crazy idea. Now, the fact that we can only launch 16 of these, okay, means we're not going to do a great deal of damage, okay, physically, okay? But this is going to really lift American morale, okay? We got the damn Japs back. Now, excuse me for saying that, but that's what people were saying when we hit the Japanese back, okay? But it had an overall effect that was more important. Okay, so if I go back to this, so as I said, the Japanese were patrolling out here. Well, because we were able to hit them, the Japanese believe in something called a kamikaze, which is a divine wind. And this belief goes back to the 13th century, where the Mongols were trying to invade Japan from the sea. And a typhoon, or hurricane as we call it in the Western Hemisphere, swept this armada of Mongols out to sea. I mean, just destroyed their fleet. And so the Japanese felt like their island was protected by this kamikaze, okay? Well, guys, that belief was shattered when those 16 bombers came through and bombed Tokyo and some other targets, okay? So this scared the crap out of the Japanese, which means they are going to extend their patrols further out into the Pacific. Now, I like to use this this analogy with football. Okay, so if you get into a situation where your team has the ball with 2 minutes left and you're down by a touchdown, the defense is going to do what's called a prevent defense. They're going to drop their linebackers back, their safeties back, and it's going to create all kinds of holes in your defense. And if you have a really good quarterback, you see this happen all the time, where they will march down the field, okay, and end up scoring a touchdown with just 2 minutes, okay, because you opened up your defense all kinds of holes in it. And that's going to happen to the Japanese, okay? So the impact of these 16 bombers is actually quite large, okay? It's a great story. Now, I'm going to mix this. I spent some time on this in class yesterday. I'm going to mix sports. Again, I just used football as an analogy, but now I'm going to bring in baseball. And what a lot of people don't know is that the most popular sport in Japan is baseball. Okay? It is also one of the most popular sports in South Korea. And you're wondering how this American game became so popular in the Far East. Well, guys, back in the 1920s, major league players did not make much money. Okay, now Babe Ruth, he was kind of the exception. But so what ends up happening is these players in the off season, to make more money, they do what's called barnstorming tours. All right, and so they would travel around to cities like Wichita that didn't have a major league team and do exhibition games against local teams. And people would pay money, and the baseball players could make more of a living. Well, guys, Major League Baseball took some of these barnstorming tours over to the Far East. And they actually went to Japan and South Korea, or Korea at the time. And so, guys, what happened? Well, Japan controlled Korea at the time. Okay. But anyhow, Babe Ruth went on these trips. Lefty Gomez, some of the all-stars, okay? And then, guys, there was a catcher for the Boston Red Sox and the the Washington Senators at the time that also went on this trip. He was not an all-star, but he had played his college ball at Yale, okay, and got his master's at Harvard. This is a very bright guy. but a good baseball player as well. And being a Major League Baseball player is good cover for a spy. This guy's name is Mo Berg. Okay, let me introduce you to Mo Berg. Okay, over here. I took these pictures at the National Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. He played 15 Major League seasons, played for the White Sox, the Red Sox, and the Washington Senators. Okay, good picture of him there. Okay, Mo Berg had a part-time job besides baseball. He was working for the director of the OSS, a guy named Wild Bill Donovan. And Wild Bill Donovan and the OSS is the Office of Strategic Services. All right, now this is the precursor to the CIA. All right, after World War II, they will convert the OSS over to the CIA. All right, so during the war, Mo Berg was sent on missions with the OSS while he was playing baseball. Okay, and so one of those missions, while he was on the barnstorming tour in the 1920s, he was sent with a panoramic camera to go to the tallest building in Tokyo, which happened to be a hospital. He dressed up in a kimono, acting like he's a tourist, harmless, and so forth. And he goes to the top of this building and takes pictures of the city, panoramic pictures of the city. It was those photographs that Mo Berg took that were used as reconnaissance by Doolittle to find targets for this bombing raid over Japan. Okay, so he, as a spy, really played a big role in this Doolittle raid. Okay, now there's a book that came out about Mo Berg, and it's kind of got a cute title. It's called The Catcher and the Spy. Get it? Catcher in the Rye, Catcher and the Spy. Okay, so I'll tell you one more story about one of his missions. Now, by 1943, when we were engulfed in this war, Mo Berg left the Red Sox and went full time with the OSS. They sent him to Austria in 1944. He was posing as an executive for Texaco Oil. And he was going to a conference where the keynote speaker was a guy named Werner Heisenberg. Heisenberg was the lead atomic scientist for Germany. Now, how do we know to look at this atomic science? Well, guys, back in 1938, Albert Einstein, you've all heard of Einstein, okay? He's a German Jew, okay, and left Germany before the Nazis took over. But Einstein warned Roosevelt that the German scientists were proposing it possible to build a weapon by splitting certain atoms, okay? And so we wanted to know if German scientists had been successful at this because we were working on it ourselves, okay? And so Berg goes to this conference speaking. He's given a pistol and a suicide pill, okay? His mission is to find out how close the Germans are to building the bomb, okay? So he goes to this conference, listens to the speech, doesn't really get anything out of it. So he goes to a cocktail party reception afterwards, and he's eavesdropping. He's just listening into conversations, and he's listening into Heisenberg. And he hears Heisenberg say, "It's too bad Germany's already lost the war." And this is mid-1944. So that convinces him that he doesn't need to use the pistol, and he can evade capture and not use the suicide pill. Okay, but I believe some of his missions are still classified to this day. Okay, so that's kind of just an interesting story about how baseball impacted the war. Okay, while I'm talking about, why not? I know some of you guys have seen the movie A League of Their Own, where women started playing baseball because so many of them, Major League Baseball had basically shut down. So many of the ball players had joined the military and served. Some died, okay? Some served distinguished careers. I'll just mention one, Ted Williams. Ted Williams, who played for the Red Sox, number 9. was the last man to hit 400 in a Major League Baseball season, and he did that in 1946, right after he got back from the war. He was a pilot in World War II. And when Korea broke out in 1950, Ted Williams left Major League Baseball and a big contract to go fly in the Korean War, to fly jets. And when he returned from Korea, he went back to playing baseball again. Okay, and my dad got to see him play his last game in Fenway Park in Boston. Okay, and his last at bat, Ted Williams hit a home run. My dad was there to see it. So that's a good story. All right. So moving forward, we're still going to stay on the Pacific here. Okay, we'll get back to North Africa tomorrow. So guys, one of the problems is we can't allow, we're doing this active defense. We cannot allow the Japanese to take certain areas, okay? Certain island chains, okay? So anywhere the Japanese can take an island, okay, they can build an airstrip on it. And if they have an airstrip on these islands, they can attack our sea lanes to Australia. We refer to Australia during the war as our Britain in the Pacific, okay? We've got Britain in the Atlantic, we've got Britain in the Pacific, Australia, okay? And we're going to be sending supplies and men and troops and so forth to Australia. If the Japanese control this area, we're in trouble. Our ships are vulnerable, okay? Our Navy is vulnerable. So when the Japanese make a move for this port right here, Port Moresby, okay, we are going to counterattack. All right. Now, this is going to change military history. This is the first time that we'll see an aircraft carrier versus aircraft carrier battle. In fact, guys, in world history, there's only been a few of these. Okay. And so this one is the first. Okay. So science has changed war forever here. Okay. Now, as the Japanese come south, we are going to counterattack with Task Force 17, two aircraft carriers, the Lexington and the Yorktown, okay? And we are going to sink an aircraft carrier here called Shoho, all right, and badly damage two other carriers that the Japanese have, the Shoikaku and the Ziyakaku, okay? They're badly damaged. They have to go back to Japan, okay? And we're going to lose the Yorktown, or excuse me, the Lexington, okay? And there's some stories I want to share with you about that, okay? But basically, you have ships far out of sight of each other that are attacking each other from the air. And you want to talk about a bad feeling. Being on a ship, being attacked from the air. You have nowhere to run. You know what I mean? Like, there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to hide. Now, you can shoot at these planes, but you're very vulnerable here, okay? As we'll talk about at the end of the war when the Japanese, you know, turn to kamikazes where they fly their planes into our ships, okay? And that's really scary and devastating, okay? So, in the end, guys, you know, losing the Lexington is a big deal. Because we only have so many carriers. And so, but the Japanese are damaged too. So the box score kind of favors Japan. But what happened here, guys, for the first time since the Japanese have been on the warpath in 1931, okay, somebody has stopped them. So for 11 years, the Japanese have been able to do whatever they wanted. And now they're going to scratch this idea of taking Port Moresby. They're going to give it up. Okay, and we're going to be able to protect our islands down here, the American Samoa, Fiji, and so forth from Japanese taking. Okay, now I'm going to be talking about Guadalcanal at the end of the day here. Okay, so that's the Battle of the Coral Sea. Okay, that's on the test. Okay, now this is a picture of the Lexington. Okay. And basically what happened, the Lexington got hit from the air, okay? And one of the bombs went through, you know, the deck and exploded our torpedoes on the Lexington. And this is where you see this huge explosion from internally of the ship, okay? And you're thinking, oh my gosh, there's about 3,000 men on this ship, how many are going to die? And so when you study about this and read about it, it's pretty amazing. Okay, on this ship, only 216 sailors are going to die. The other 2,735, including the captain's Cocker Spaniel, will go over the edge. Okay, and they will. I'm trying to get out of this light a little bit and have the screen on. Okay. Anyhow, they'll go over the side without one drowning. That's pretty amazing, okay, looking at this photograph, all right? This is a picture of the Ziyakaku here, okay, and one of their other carriers under attack, all right? And then this is like an aerial photograph of the Battle of the Coral Sea, all right? So, Yorktown's going to sink, okay, but most of the men will survive. Now, 1 month later, the Japanese are going to make a play for this. This is Midway Island. Now, I can't take credit for this photograph. That's National Geographic, all right? And if you look at this island, this is a big coral reef around it. But the island itself is very small. You would not be able to find it unless you knew the coordinates of this island. It's in the middle of the Pacific, okay? But it's got a large landing strip on it. It's a refueling depot for aircraft and ships. Okay, so when my dad in 1951 flew to Korea, to Japan, he was flying a C-47. He landed on this island and refueled and then went on to Japan. Okay, so it's a very important piece of real estate. Japanese are coming after it. Okay, now there's a movie that came out by Hollywood called Midway, just I think last year. It's not bad. A lot of it's done with computer graphics. So if you watch Pearl Harbor, they actually use real aircraft for the movie. Where in this, it's all computer generated, which it's just not the same to me. It looks pretty realistic, but it's not. Anyhow, this island is of great importance. Now, we have broken the Japanese naval code, okay, through that project called Magic. Okay, and so the Japanese are going to attack the island on June 4th, about a month after Coral Sea. Now, we knew they were coming. Now, the guy in charge of the American fleet in the Pacific is a guy named Admiral Chester Nimitz. Okay? Nimitz knows they're coming. We're ready. What he's going to do is he's going to hold our carriers, and we got 3 carriers. We got the Enterprise, the Lexington that was at Coral Sea and was damaged, but they fixed it at sea, and the Hornet will be back in action in the Pacific. Okay? So we got 3 carriers, and we're kind of hiding them to the rear. The Japanese come close to the island. They send up their carrier planes, and they don't see our Navy. Now, a lot of their planes were fitted with torpedoes to attack ships because they kind of expected us to be protecting it. And so a lot of the Japanese aircraft went back to their carriers to refit for bombs to attack the island. Well, we got lucky. One of our squadrons that was up in the air looking for the Japanese Navy found one of the carriers with the planes on the deck, which is great because then you have easy access to attack that ship without fighting the planes in the air. Okay, and so we got really fortunate there. In fact, guys, we are going to get really fortunate in this whole battle. Okay, we're not going to sink 1 Japanese carrier, not 2, not 3, but 4 Japanese carriers. Okay, this decimates the Japanese fleet, okay? And it also decimates their aircraft because there's nowhere to land in the middle of the Pacific for all these flight crews on these carriers. So we're talking about hundreds, over 300 Japanese aircraft that will be destroyed along with these 4 carriers, okay? And we are going to lose the Lexington, okay? But in overall effect, guys, this is a turning point in the war. Okay, so we really see this as the balance of naval power shifting in our favor. Okay, so this goes down in military lore as one of the greatest American victories in military history. Okay, Battle of Midway Island. All right, so They will abandon Midway, Fiji, and Samoa. If the Japanese were able to take this island, they could bomb Hawaii whenever they wanted. They could put their land-based bombers on here and go after Hawaii. Okay, we can't let that happen. Okay. So let me show you a little bit about the Yorktown. Okay, this is the Yorktown under attack. Okay, it was hit by Japanese Vals and Zeros. These are their dive bombers and so forth. We thought we were going to be able to save the ship, but then a couple of Japanese submarines sent torpedoes into the Yorktown. Okay, as you can see in this picture down here, it's listing to the side, and you see other ships around it. So they're able to save these sailors that are on the ship. Okay, they'll be able to pick them up from the water. All right, which is great. Okay, now I told a story in class yesterday about the battle, the USS Indianapolis, which was not so fortunate. Okay, now this is later in the war. The Indianapolis is a destroyer and is sent on a special mission. So guys, when we created the atomic bomb, we had to deliver it to the Pacific. Okay, and so they put it on the USS Indianapolis. Now the crew did not know what was on their ship. Okay. And because it was a secret mission, they didn't want to draw attention by having a bunch of ships, so they were alone. The Indianapolis successfully delivered the atomic bomb to Tinian Island, okay? But when they left Tinian Island, they were still alone. Now, the captain of this ship, when you're in this, sub-infested waters, you're supposed to serpentine, a zigzag as you're moving. He didn't do that, and was later blamed for what happened. He would eventually end up being convicted and committed suicide over this whole thing. Okay, some people think he was wrongly convicted over this, but anyhow, there's a movie called USS Indianapolis with Nicolas Cage. It's not very good, but it gives you the history. Anyhow, these guys, as they left Tinian Island, they got hit by Japanese torpedoes. And as the ship went down, there were no accompanying ships with it. And they were in shark-infested waters. Okay, so I'm not sure the true number of how many, but I think it's around 500 sailors, while they were floating in the water for days, were succumbed to shark attack. It was horrendous. It's one of the worst stories of the war. Was the USS Indianapolis. Okay, some of the men did survive to tell the story of what happened, and this is just horrible for those guys, for that crew. Okay, all right. So yeah, I said I was going to talk about Guadalcanal. All right, and one of the problems we have here. All right, and this is an incredible story, but one of the problems we have is the Japanese. This is the Solomon Island chain here, okay? Again, the proximity to Australia is important. So the Japanese take this island, and they're starting to build airstrips on it. If they build airstrips on it, they can attack our Navy as we try and supply our Britain in the Pacific. So the decision is made. We're going to retake that island, or take that island. Now, who do you send in first? Who gets to go in first? It's the Marines, guys, okay? So we had no idea what to expect. The Japanese did not think we were going to attack them, so they were caught off guard. So most of the people that were on that island at the time were building the runways. They didn't have a bunch of troops on Guadalcanal. So when our troops landed, they met very little resistance. They start going in, and within 36 hours, we've taken the airfields. We're like, sweet, mission accomplished, right? Well, the Japanese are going to counterattack when they find out that we've hit this island, all right? And so that night, after we drop off all these Marines, I think it's something around 20,000, okay, Marines, we drop them off on this island, all right? Well, then there's a battle, a naval battle called the Battle of Savo Island. And what's going to happen there is all the transport ships that are being protected by Australian crew